Thank you. You may be seated. Today we are in a book of the Bible that's the only book of the Bible that doesn't mention God by name. It's an unusual Bible text that we're going to look at, but a tremendous text. We're going to talk about a young woman who went from being an orphan to becoming an influential queen. It's fascinating. The idea of an orphan becoming someone significant like a queen is not something you'd ordinarily look at and say, here's the projection of your future. Today, as we look at our culture and where we are, orphans and foster care, if you do any statistic or any research and just the casual research on it, and there's a ton of research, 2 out of 10, and with a lot of influence, a lot of people that are working hard at this, 2 out of 5 that are in foster care, that age out of foster care, 2 out of 5 end up either incarcerated or homeless by the time they're 21. It's fascinating. It's heartbreaking. It's sad, actually. Now, I'm not knocking this system. I'm just looking at what's going on, right? Because there's a whole lot of people that are dumping their time and energy and effort into foster care and caring for children and doing the best that they can with it. And I know people that are fostering children and doing a great job with it and working through the different challenges and things that are going on within that. Then you look at orphans, and there's a lot of orphans as well in our country, which is fascinating. You go outside of our country and you look at this as a different kind of an issue, and you just look at an orphan, or you look at someone in foster care and that kind of a system in that sense, and the trajectory of that person becoming successful or prominent is highly unlikely. It's not that they're doomed, it's that there's so many challenges in front of them. Now, that's in our culture that we are pulling for people that are in foster care. We're pulling for people that are orphans. We want to see some success going on there. Back in this day, orphans were left for dead, left to fend for themselves, left to be homeless, living on the streets. There's countries around the world today that orphans are much the same. Sad, actually. So you'd look and you'd say, with this person we're looking at, you wouldn't look at her and say, as a 2-year-old, she's going to make a legacy for people to respect. You would look at her and say, I hope she survives to be 16. Based on that and other things, she's an orphan, she's an ethnic minority in a place that she doesn't belong, essentially. She's a woman in a male-dominated society. Not like today. Today, there's a lot of questions there, but this is much greater of a male-dominated society in that women didn't count for anything hardly. They were disposable, if you will. And we're actually going to see that in the story. So, to say it in this kind of way, the deck is stacked against her, is my point. You ever feel like the deck is stacked against you? Like you have all these things that aren't going your way. With this woman, the deck was stacked against her. And she was used to make a legacy in a tremendous way. Let's dive in. Here's her story. In the book of Esther, we're going to see her story. Her name is Esther, and that's why the book was named this. It's in your Old Testament. If you want to turn there with me, we're going to look at several verses as we just kind of walk through this book together. And then I'm going to give some application. What gave her the kind of push to make a legacy is the question. What is it that changed her life that went from being an orphan, an ethnic minority, a woman in a male-dominated society? What is it that helped through all of those things to make a legacy on the other side? Here's her story. Esther chapter 1. gives the backstory to her life. And what's going on here in Persia is in the days of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus he reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. He's the king. He sat on the royal throne in Susa, the citadel. And so here he is the king who's reigning over 127 provinces, a huge kingdom, if you will. A very, very powerful man, very rich as well. And so here's what he does, 127 provinces, right? He sets up to have a party. Kind of likes to let people know how rich he is. You know people like that? I saw yesterday, somebody was showing me that there's somebody that had their Rolls Royce painted with diamond glitter in the paint on the Rolls Royce. Now, that's incredible. That's like rich and then rich on top of that, right? Like, I just want to show off how rich I am. Well, that's the king. Like, I'm so rich, I just want to show it off. And so he invites all the people that are in charge of the different provinces, the respectable people and the wise people, to come and to hang out with them for a party, just to see the different things and see how rich he is. So how long does a party normally last? One day? An evening? Like, if you have a big, luxurious party, it's a weekend. No, not this guy. He's look, a Rolls Royce with diamond glitter in the black paint, that's nothing compared to King Ahasuerus. He throws a party that lasts for months. Months. And it's day after day. They're having different feasts and different things that are going on. And he's showing them this area and that area and all the riches that he has, that he's amassed for himself and such. And they're just like, wow. It's to kind of show off how impressive he is, right? And then he's getting to the tail end of this party. And he wants to show off the one thing. He's had a little bit too much to drink, probably a lot too much to drink. And he wants to show off the one thing that probably he shouldn't be showing off, the queen. So he calls for the queen. He says, hey, bring she's like really hot. So bring her out. I've shown you all the palace and all these things, but I want to show you the hottest woman in town. So have her come out wearing only her crown. Now listen, ladies. Prince Charming or dirty old man? Right? Like, that's easy. Yes, multiple choice. Dirty old man, kind of weird. He's drank too much, and then he's inviting his wife, the queen, who should be respectable, out to show off her body. Well, one thing you don't do to the king is you don't reject the king. You don't reject a king that's showing off everything about his life that makes him something significant in his perspective. Well, the queen does exactly that. She says, I'm not going out there like this. You've had way too much to drink. Sleep it off. I'm not doing this. No way. Queen Vashti says no. The king is a little bit irate. Why? How many of you like to be rejected? Yeah, I don't think so. No one likes to be rejected, right? It doesn't matter whether the plan for the king was good and honorable. In his mind, it made total sense. You ever do decisions where it makes total sense in the moment, and later on you're like, I shouldn't have done that. And that's kind of where he was. He made and so now he's rejected in a bad position, and he's trying to figure this out. She says no. He's embarrassed, humiliated in front of all the people that he spent the last 6 months impressing. Do you get the feeling? So what do you do as a king? Well, you get the guys in a male-dominated society around you to come up with a plan. What should we do with the queen? Well, you have to prove that you are stronger than the queen now because she just outmaneuvered you. That's how it works, yes? So they all come up with a plan together. It's all men. They come up with a brilliant plan together, and the plan is we're going to make a law. The law says, women, you have to obey your husband and never reject them. My words. Okay, ladies, good law, bad law. Okay? Why? It's missing something important, right? But it works for the guys. Here was the fear. The fear was, if we don't do something, our wives are going to reject us. And we have to prove that we are something. Because they said we are. Interesting. So that's kind of how things go. And Queen Vashti, she's out. Now, the next part of the story is where Esther comes in. Because they realize, well, we have a vacancy. So what are we going to do? Let's have a show. Let's call it Miss Persia. Search for the new queen, right? And you can see the telecasters and people coming out. We are in search for the new queen. Where are we going to find her? And all this other stuff. Can you see the show kind of working itself out? So he's searching for the new queen. Reminder, the king is not Prince Charming. He's dirty old man. Okay? It would be cool to be the queen, but you got to be married to that guy. That requires some expectations. We'll just leave it at that. G-rated, yes? Okay. Verse 5. The search for the new queen starts in verse 5 of chapter 2. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai. Remember Mordecai, important name in this. The son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. If you could do the history behind this, the background is he's King Saul's relative, the first king in Israel, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So the people there, and Mordecai specifically, the Jewish people, had been taken captive from King Nebuchadnezzar, taken out of Jerusalem, and they were in this place in Susa, in a place where they did not belong, essentially. They were foreigners in a foreign land. And so in verse 7, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. Now, backstory. Some historians that do some research on some of the historical documents, while it's not listed here, and you can see at the end of the book of Esther that her parents had died. And some historians look and say that most likely one person wrote that the father died while she was pregnant, and then the mother died during childbirth. Something around that. Or maybe they died while she was young. We're not sure. All we know is her parents had died, leaving her as orphans, as an orphan. So Mordecai is bringing her up, is raising this young woman. It says about Esther, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So Mordecai is raising her. Now, nothing is said about Mordecai having a wife. So the assumption based on that is because if he did have a wife, it would generally and typically list her as Mordecai and so raised her. So the assumption is based on the text that Mordecai is raising her on his own. So when the king's order and edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther was also, note this word, taken into the king's palace and put into custody of Hegai, who had charge over the women. So Esther, who's raised by Mordecai, is taken, not she voluntarily went, she was taken into custody. They looked at her and said, she's beautiful, she fits what the king's looking for, she's going to be great for Miss Persia contest, bring her along, we're taking her into captivity. If you fail to meet the requirements of being the queen, there's only one that will, what happens is you go into the harem of who the king has at his disposal, if you will. So this is a permanent change for her life. She's never to live with Mordecai again. She's going to live somewhere in the king's palace, whether it's as a slave in the palace or as the queen, one or the other somewhere. So this is a life-changing moment for her. Raised by Mordecai, and here's what we know. She's attractive, very attractive physically, for it to note that. Then it says in verse 8, it talks about Hegai, and Hegai who was put in charge of her. And then it says in verse 9, the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So she's promoted up because of this person, Hegai, which says something about her as a person. That says socially she was confident. She was confident. She wasn't an angry person for the situation she found herself in. She was confident that this is where I am. I need to make the best of it. And so she's socially confident there for him to recognize, hey, she's a good person to put there. And so he pushes her up to the forefront. Verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her to not make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So then the turn came for the woman to go into the king Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations. So she's been beautifying herself, going through all kinds of treatments to make her even more beautiful, doing all the makeup routines and the hair routines and all this other routines and everything. And ladies, you know all about this stuff. There's people that do YouTube videos and all blogs and stuff on how to do makeup, and I think it's hilarious, but that's just because that's not something I do. Anyway, we'll move on from there. So she's doing this and beautifying herself that much more, and then she has to go into King Ahasuerus and be part of that contest, if you will, and win his heart. Ladies, let's go back. Is it Prince Charming or Dirty Old Man? How easy is it to try to win over Dirty Old Man when there's other women compete? Like, he's easy to, but can you get your heart there? Do you see the challenge that's going on? So she actually wins. She becomes the new queen. And the king then makes a big parade and a day for her and gives her all kinds of things, and she doesn't have to pay taxes and stuff, and gives her all kinds of gifts. So that's the first part of the story. That's chapter 1, chapter 2. The end of chapter 2, Mordecai is there at the king's gate. Just he always wants to know, hey, what's going on with Esther? He's not allowed in there. He can't be part of her life anymore, but he's always trying to find out what's going on. While he's there at the king's gate, he's overhearing a plot to kill the king by a couple of the king's servants that are there always with the king. And so they're having this conversation outside. He overhears the thing that's going on. He then reports it to Esther. Hey, there's a plot against the king. These two guys are doing it. Esther then goes to the king and tells whoever and gets it to the king, and they do the research and they find out they truly were planning to kill the king. And so they take these two traitors and they hang them on the gallows. And they just write Mordecai. She says, it wasn't me that knew, it was Mordecai. He's out there. And so you should write his, and they wrote his name down as the person, gives him the credit. Which, by the way, doesn't that say something about her character? She's confident. She doesn't need to prove herself and make herself look good instead of Mordecai. She is totally content to make Mordecai look good. You ever with people that they take credit for other people's work? Isn't that fun? Esther does not take credit for someone else's work. She gives him the credit. It says something about her character. Then in chapter 3, it's interesting, this new guy comes into play, Haman, and Haman is hired by the king, kind of be one of his right-hand men, and then promoted in such a way where the king, in verse 3, says, and all the king's servants who were with the king gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, because the king, he commanded that everybody bow down to Haman as he walked by. What a great king. Can you see that? Like, this is a great guy. I love this guy. When his top guys walk by, you've got to bow down to him. He's an amazing guy. I would love to be friend, right? Okay, so that's the picture we get. And Haman, he's all about that, man. He loves the power. As he climbs up in power, it's like, oh, yeah, I am more powerful than you, and everybody's got to bow down to me. This is so great. I love it. And he's enjoying this power. But as he does, he's walking by the king's gate, and this one guy keeps coming back, Mordecai. He wants nothing to do with bowing down to Haman, so he doesn't do it. Everybody else is, but Mordecai does not. So what do the people around the gate do? They go to Haman and say, yo, man, did you see Mordecai? He does not bow down to you. What's his problem? Well, Mordecai's now in trouble. Haman's extra angry, and he confronts, and things don't go so well. So here's what he does. I need to get rid of him. I'm going to kill the person that doesn't honor me. Why? Because success is measured by what people think of you, and I need to make sure that people think well of me, and I can't have anybody disrespecting me. I can't have any of that. No competition. This is a male-dominated, power-struggling kind of a society, and this is how we're going to do things. So we got to get rid of this Mordecai. So he comes up with a plan. Comes up with a law, and he gets the king to sign it. He goes to the king, he says, hey, there's these people that do not obey your laws. let's be real. There's this person that doesn't want to bow down to me. But there's these people that don't listen to your laws. We should get rid of them all. So in about a year from now, let's have a day where anybody and everybody in the kingdom can go and kill this group of people off and take all their things. And listen, King, I'll make sure it's going to be such a profitable thing for you, King, because you've been losing so much because these people are so bad, that I'll make sure $10,000 goes into your treasury and stuff, and you'll be paid back very well for this. That's the plan. King says, sounds like a good idea. We got to keep things in order. We got to keep things in check. We can't have anybody not obey my laws. This is about power. So he signs in a law. Mordecai hears about it. Why? Because Haman lets him know. And there's the signs that they're putting up. Hey, next year about this time, we're going to have the annihilation of the Jewish people. And so Mordecai now in chapter 4 is just broken down. It says that Mordecai learned all that had been done. Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out in the midst of the city and cried out loud with a bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king commanded and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Why? Because annihilation was at the door. Well, Esther, she doesn't know anything about this. She's not involved in the lawmaking. She's kind of oblivious. And the young women come to and tell her that, hey, there's something wrong with Mordecai. He's not dressed so well. Like, he can't even come in the gates. There's something wrong with him. And so what she does is she sends him a new pair of clothes and says, you need to dress up and don't embarrass me so much, I guess. And so she sends him clothes, and he responds back and says, no, I'm not wearing that. You understand? This is intentional. And in that day, what they would do when they were brokenhearted, they would tear their clothes, they would weep, they would mourn, they would fast. That would be normal. And they would throw ashes on their head, and they would give the outward picture of how they feel internally. Wouldn't that be nice some days? Just to say, I am broken inside, and you tear your clothes and throw ashes on you, and you just are weeping and saying, I'm done, I'm broken, and that's where the people are. So she goes and finds out what's going on. And Mordecai says back to her in verse 8, and she's sending Hattach, which is his name. If I'm saying it right, I don't know, but he can't correct me, so it's okay. Hattach, and she's sending him back and forth, by the way, which is one of the king's servants. And so Mordecai sends back and gives her a copy of the written decree, and this is verse 8 of chapter 4. For their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and it commanded her to go to the king and to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. So Mordecai, the one who raised her, is saying, you need to do something about this. You need to go to the king, talk to the king. You need to persuade him, do whatever you have to do, because we're all going to die. It's a grave situation. She responds back, and she says, Mordecai, you don't understand. This is verse 11. You understand, anybody that goes into the king's presence that's unannounced, if the king doesn't like it, he just has you killed right in the spot. Off with his head. Off with her head. That's it. You're done. And she says, I haven't been with him for 30 days. And I don't know. We don't have a meeting planned, so I have no idea what's going to happen. I can't do that unless if I die, unless if I'm willing to die. And he responds back and says this, and this is tremendous. Verse 12, they told Mordecai what Esther said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the Jews, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. Listen, if you don't step up and do something, somebody else will. God's not going to allow the Jews to be annihilated. That's his people. It'll just be somebody else that takes care of this. And he says, but you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So he's saying, listen, I understand the risk, but Perhaps you're there for this purpose and this reason. Esther responds and sends him back to Mordecai and says, go tell everybody to fast and pray for 3 days. To fast and to pray is simply to say, I'm going without food and I'm begging God to do something incredible. There's people that take this seriously, and to this day that they fast and they pray. They spend a day, a season, a few days or whatever, and some people will fast for 30 days in different ways, and there's several different fasts you can do, and this is what we'll call an absolute fast. They're going without food and water to just beg God to do something mighty. And then she's going to go to the king. So she goes to the king, chapter 5. She goes to the king. She stands in the inner court, and this had to be a terrifying moment because she's standing before the person that could have her killed immediately. The king looks and says, basically, thumbs up, you're all right. What do you want, Queen Esther? Step 1, she's gotten through. She goes up to the king and she says to the king, if you're okay with the king, I'd like to invite you and Haman to a feast I'd like to prepare for you later on. Will you come? Well, the king likes feasts. He's a partier. And so he says, sure. Haman, that's a promotion. It's just me and the king with the queen. This is amazing. Oh man, things are really going well. My trajectory is awesome. Like I'm completing my resume as we speak. It's amazing. And so they get together, they have their first time together in this amazing meal, and she is, has whatever cooked for him and has this awesome feast going on, and he says, hey, listen, I know, my words, not hers or his, I know we're here for a reason. What is it that you really want from me? You didn't just make a feast. I know there's something attached. What's going on here? What is it that you're asking for? And she responds back and she says, if it pleases the king, could we have another feast tomorrow? And at your request, I will tell you what my request is. She's kind of putting it back on him. Don't you see a lot of brains here? I mean, she is smart, yes? She's got it together. She's a young lady, maybe in her 20s. So he says, sure, no problem. Haman, absolutely, he is dead on. Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow. Clear my schedule. We're going to have another feast with the queen and king. This is amazing. Awesome time. Can't wait for this. Goes home, and while he's going home, who's he see? Mordecai. Mordecai's a thorn in his flesh, just irritates him, grates him. Every time he's standing up, doesn't bow down to him, and he goes and he's talking to his wife, and his wife's like, why don't you just hang him? Get rid of him. Kill him. So he makes plans to do that, like within the day. Goes to sleep. King goes to sleep. Everybody's asleep. King wakes up, and he just can't sleep. So what do you do when you can't sleep? Well, you read anything that's boring, right? You read anything that makes you feel better. Maybe he's got some anxiety, some stress going on in his life. So what does he do? He pulls out the book of things that people did nice for me. Right? What a great book. A great guy. Like, I'm just going to, everybody that did nice things to me, I'm going to read this. I'll feel better about myself. It's kind of like a yoga exercise or something like, I feel good because they like me. And that's what he's reading. And as he's reading it, Mordecai is in there as the person that told about this, people that want to kill him. But he realizes Mordecai was never rewarded. Well, this bothers him. He can't sleep. So what's he do? He calls Haman. Haman, we got a problem here, bud. Listen, you've been doing such an awesome job at taking care of these things. I'm so appreciative of you. But just anonymously, I just asking for a friend. What if, just kind of figure this out, what if there's this guy you really, really want to let everybody know that you appreciate? I mean, they're this over-the-top, really awesome person. What would you do for that person? Well, who's Haman thinking? Yeah, it's me. Oh, man. King's asking me what he wants, what he should be getting me for Christmas. Oh, boy, here we go. So Haman's thinking. And he says to the king, he says, well, Here's what I would do. I would get the best clothes. Like, not Kohl's. Right? No offense if you weren't Kohl's like me, but not Kohl's. But like, let's go up a level. Let's go to the King of Prussia Mall, the richest place there. Well, I don't even know what it is. I was out at this one place in Colorado last year, and we were in this store that I wasn't shopping for me or my wife. I love her, but I wasn't shopping, and she wouldn't let me do this. And I saw this coat. Like, it was like it wasn't like a heavy coat. It was just a nice coat. And they wanted $1,600 for this thing. And I'm like, what's wrong with these people? Right? So Haman's like, man, you got to go to this place. You got to go shopping over here. You got to get this really nice coat, the nice shoes. You got to get the whole outfit going on. Treat them really good, so that this is paying for the whole bit. Like, and then that horse we got, that's the beautiful black stallion or whatever. I'll ride him around on that in the center of town. And you got to have somebody's got a big booming, James Earl Jones kind of voice that says, now this guy, right? This is what happens to those that honor the king. Haman's got it together. I think, just my thought, he dreamed of this. You ever have dreams like this? Like the boss promotes you, somebody likes you, right? This is Haman, and king goes, Haman, you are spectacular, creative. I love what you're doing. There's this guy named Mordecai. Does Haman know who Mordecai is? Yes. Does the king realize that Haman knows who Mordecai is? No. So the king says, hey, there's this guy, Mordecai, that I want you to do this to. And Haman just internally is like, are you kidding me? Oh. I was about to kill him in a couple hours. Oh, if I would have just done this yesterday and not gone to bed early. Oh, this is terrible. So what's he have to do? Goes, gets Mordecai, walks around town. Here's what happens to the guy that honors the king. Well, the second feast is later on that day. King, Haman, Esther get together. Chapter 7. Verse 1, here's the rest of the story, if you will. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even the half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. Queen, what do you want? Like, no matter what you want, I got it. Blank check, let's go. And she says this, verse 3, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted for my wish and my people for my request. Do you hear what she's saying? She's so smart. Listen, king, if I found favor in your sight, my life is at risk, and my family's life is at risk. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for a nickel. I'm not asking for a palace. I just don't want to die, and I don't want my family to die. Do you see how brilliant she is? I mean, she's got it together. She has him in a place where he is looking at her and saying, I'm so glad you're my queen. Regardless of whether she's comfortable or not, it doesn't matter. Regardless of whether he's a dirty old man or not, it doesn't matter. She's given her very best. Verse 4, she contextualizes it a little bit better. And I think these next words seal the deal. It says, for we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Listen, King, I'll just give some clarity. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for affliction is not to be compared with loss to the king. King, it's about you. You are going to lose something significant and huge in your kingdom if me and my people are all dead. And I don't want you to lose that. If we were your slaves, we'd still be a blessing for you. But to annihilate us, that's the problem. Well, he's pretty angry. And he says, who is he and where is he? Who has dared to do this? Who's sitting right next to the king? Look, he has no idea that Esther is a Jew. He has no idea she's related to Mordecai. Haman's just kind of sitting there like, yeah. I mean, this is really cool. I wouldn't want anybody to hurt you. And she turns and she looks at Haman square in the eyes. Esther said, a foe and an enemy, is verse 6. This wicked Haman. Could you imagine? And here's Haman's response. I want to say it in my language. And Haman wet his pants right there. Right? And Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. He's like, oh no. What did I do now? The king did something interesting. He got up and walked out. Here's a simple, tiny little application. Sometimes when the anger is up here, the best thing to do is to get up and walk out. And he did. He got up and he walked out. He rose in his wrath from the wine drinking, and he went into the palace in the garden to kind of calm down a little bit to try to figure this out. But Haman stayed. And Haman stayed, and he begins to beg for his life with the queen. The queen has nothing to say about this. It's not her decision. It's the king's decision. And Haman's pleading with her, and you kind of see the picture that the writer is painting, that he's basically up in her face, almost on top of her in anger, yelling at her or whatever, as the king walks back in, really in a way where he's attacking her. Well, that sealed the deal for the king and says, what are you doing with my queen, my wife? And he pulls him away, and his servants say, hey, king, we got an idea. There's some gallows out there that were really tall that they just put up. I don't know what they're for, but I think he would look really good as a picture outside your window hanging from the gallows. And he does. The gallows that they set up for Mordecai, Haman gets hung on. Whew. The rest of the story then from chapter 8 all the way through is this, that Esther saves the Jewish people, but there's a law that is in place that the king can't even go against his own law. So he allows for Esther to come up with a second law to be able to allow the people to protect themselves instead of going into this without protection. And as a result then, he promotes Mordecai from being at the king's gate to Mordecai being in charge of Haman's house to being his right-hand man. It's really a fascinating turn of events. So here's the question, as I try to pull this together. What took Esther from being an orphan to being the influential queen that she was? Because I don't know about you, sometimes I feel like I'm an orphan, or sometimes we're in a position or a place where we feel out of place, where I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. How do I walk through this? How do I do this? How do I get to this point? And what do I do with this person? And here's Esther. As an orphan, she goes to becoming an influential queen. What is it that got her there? And I'm going to say two things. One, Esther was influenced by the right people. You see that through her life. She's influenced by the right people. I think this book could have been named Mordecai, because Mordecai influenced her tremendously. But I'm glad it's Esther, because Esther's the one that stood up and did the right things. But they kind of co-shared the spotlight in this story, where Mordecai raised her. He didn't have to, but he dedicated his life to raising her and giving her the value and the respect that she needed. He didn't treat her poorly. What he did was he talked to her internally, and you could see that by her social confidence with people, by her going into the king's palace in a very difficult situation and having the strength to be able to walk through this. She knew what to do. Why? Because Mordecai raised her in a way that gave her strength and courage and confidence. She listened to his advice. When she was taken, he said, "Don't tell anyone that you're a Jew. Keep that to yourself." She listened and shared the plot against the king from Mordecai. And when Mordecai said to her, "You need to do something about this. This perhaps is why you're here," she listened. She was influenced by the right people, Mordecai being the top person. And then you'd have Haggai that told her how she should treat the king in the very first Miss Persia kind of contest. And then you have Hathach, who's one of the king's eunuchs that was there to care for her, that she knew she could trust. And so she trusted him with these very confidential conversations between her and Mordecai. Here's what she did. She surrounded herself with good people while being surrounded by evil people. Do you see it? I don't know about you, but it's hard to get away from evil people, isn't it? It's hard to get away from people that want to do wrong to you. And if you work in a place where you have a lot of people around you, you understand this. And in your neighborhood and different things, it seems like there's a plethora of people that like to do harm to other people. And we feel it more and more. Here, while Esther was surrounded by evil people, what she did was she intentionally surrounded herself with the right people. If you want to become influential, surround yourself. Be influenced by the people that are the right people. Make clear distinctions there. And here's what we see. While God is never mentioned in this book, her faith in God, calling the people to pray and fast for 3 days, lets us into her faith in God. That she trusted God, that God would take care of this. So that's the first thing. She was influenced by the right people. And then the second part, Esther refused to be influenced by certain things. She was influenced by the right people, and she refused to be influenced by certain things. There's 3 things. 1, fear. She was afraid. To go into this context, to go into this thing with the king and say, okay, we'll see how this works out. Will I be the queen or not? This had to be a lot of fear, but fear didn't stop her from becoming the queen. And then when she's put in this position to go confront the king, which nobody confronts the king, she had to confront the king for what was going on because he signed it into law, and he has Haman as his right-hand man. Fear did not hold her back from confronting the king's choices. And she admits to the fear, if I do this, I might die. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? And heart had to be racing at that moment. Fear didn't hold her back from confronting the king's choices. Listen, in order to go forward, oftentimes we have to move past our fears. We can't just let our fear hold us back because fear is not from God. We should have the confidence that God has us in a place that he wants us to be in to grow in the way he wants us to grow. The second thing she refused to be influenced by is her position. She became the queen, and here's what happens when many people become successful and they get that right position, they stop listening to people. You ever find that? The higher you go, the less people you listen to. I don't really need to hear what you have to say because I'm the queen. Hello? I've got it all together. Mordecai, listen, it was nice having you as a kid, but now I've moved past you. I don't need you in my life anymore. That's not where she was. You find that she's still listening to Mordecai while she was the queen. She refused to be influenced by her position. By the way, don't you see the opposite with Haman? As Haman grew in his position, that becomes so significant to him, and he didn't want to listen to anybody. He was all about himself. Then the third thing that we see that she refused to be influenced by is her lack of experience or her insecurities. She didn't go to queen school, did she? Probably didn't go to any beauty pageant ever. That wasn't part of her life. You ever go into a situation where you've never had the opportunity to deal with this before, and you're like, I have no idea what to do. You know what we do today? We Google it, right? What does everybody else do? There's got to be somebody that's going through the same thing. What do they do? And sometimes that's helpful. Other times it's not. She didn't have Google, right? She's going into this with, I don't know how I'm going to handle this, and I didn't have any school to prep me for this, but I got to figure this out. The lack of experience or her insecurities of telling her, you're a failure, you're no good, you're not going to make it. I mean, you're just an orphan girl, you're out of place, you're just this dumb girl that doesn't know anything about anything. All of these things, the voices in her head could be talking her out of doing what God's plan for her would be. And the second part is, when she goes to confront the king, how does she know how to do this? Who gave her the plan? Mordecai didn't. Mordecai just simply said, hey, you need to do something. Go talk to the king. So for her, it's pray and fast for 3 days, and she's like, Lord, what do I do? How do I handle this? I don't know what to do. A little niche over here is she had tremendous patience and discipline. You see that? To wait for 3 days, to wait for that specific timing, then to have feast number 1, and that discipline to sit in the room at the table with Haman, the enemy, her foe, have a meal with him, while he's laughing, have a good time, carrying on a good social conversation with him. It's discipline. It's patience. She waited and she worked it through. The lack of experience didn't stop her. In the end, Esther was the influential queen because she didn't wait for someone else to do something. When she saw that the opportunity was right in front of her, she did it. Goes back to chapter 4, verse 14, when Mordecai said to her, who knows whether you have not come to this kingdom for such a time as this? Perhaps, church, perhaps where you are in your house, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, in your school, perhaps where you are is because God put you there. Esther was taken, forced into this position. And perhaps where you are right now, it's because God wants you there to be the influential person that you are called to be with the people in your workplace, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your home, wherever it might be, that God's called you to be the influencer as Esther was. He's called the church to be the salt and the light. The salt and the light is influential in the world. So we choose people that are influencers around us, that are good people to lead us in a way that are right. And then as we do that, we don't let our fears and our insecurities and our lack of experience get the best of us. What we do is we walk in and we say, maybe I don't know how to do this. Maybe I've never done this before, but Lord, you're going to guide me and strengthen me and give me the right things to do in this moment. So Lord, just help me to go forward as your influencer for such a time as this. As I evaluate life, it's kind of funny. You watch young kids in high school graduate, and you ever look at the graduation pamphlets? I've been to tons of graduations, right? And the graduation pamphlets talk about where the kids are going to go. I'm going to be an electrical engineer. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be this and that. And it's great. They're dreaming the dream of where they're going to go. And what's fascinating is from that point to 20 years later, the amount of people that actually followed through with this are very, very few people. Not because they did something wrong back here, because life has a way of turning things around. That when you thought, man, I would love to be, and then you get to do it and you're like, I don't like this at all. And it doesn't work out, and I want to do something different. And here's the point. Life has its turns. Right, left, straight. You can't guarantee that what you think back here is where you're going to be down here. But perhaps God has a plan for the whole thing. And where you are today, perhaps it's because God's got you right where he wants you to be as the influencer with the people that you're surrounded with. One note about influencers, and I'll close. Influence does not happen in a moment. It requires trust and consistency over time. Mordecai was an influencer to Esther. Why? Over time, he was consistent with her and built trust with her. And so she knew when he spoke. she knew that she could listen to him. So as we influence others, it takes time, it takes consistency, and it doesn't happen in a moment. So don't think, hey, I want to be an influencer, and you go out today and say, here I come. It's no, just time, consistency. And God will work it out in his timing, exactly what he wants. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for all that you're doing in our life. Thank you for where you put us. Some things are really hard to walk through. And some people that you've put into our life are really difficult, like Haman and the king. And Lord, it's just challenging. So Lord, help us to walk with you. Give us the wisdom, the insight to be who you've called us to be in every situation, so that we would bring glory to you. We thank you for our time together. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Hey, thanks for being here. Have an awesome rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back next week.